Hey, here we are. Here we are. Let me get my life together. Holy moly. Don't ask me why I have a little wooden Easter egg. This was like, I found this living in one of the plant pots. And I found I use these fake flowers too to like prop up my other plants. It's a vibe. I don't know how I lived before being surrounded by plant babies. I don't know what I did with myself before I was poison ivy in the flesh. I don't feel like I'm a complete person if I'm not surrounded by plants that I'm cultivating and decorating with random knickknacks. Okay, chapter 11. What are we looking at? So there's actually 12 chapters. When I started this book, I thought there were 11. And it looks like chapter 11 is actually very short. So I'm going to breeze through chapter 11. Might even be able to do chapter 12 today. I doubt it. I talk too much. Yeah, it's been a ride. Reading this book has been a journey, a saga, even. And I'm glad that my complex post traumatic stress disorder made an appearance, getting triggered as hell by a Facebook group and then bringing that attitude onto the live stream. I must admit, this morning and last night, I'm distracted by videos of how to become a digital nomad. Good morning. I've been looking up how to take what I'm doing on the road and travel to cheaper places to live than California in countries that are not imperialist empires. But then again, it's like I have complex post traumatic stress disorder. In California, recreational marijuana is legal. And in the city of Oakland, magic mushrooms are decriminalized. I'm not saying microdosing magic mushrooms is going to solve all my problems, but I feel like it would solve 99% of them. You know what I'm saying? I feel like if I live in a state within a reasonable drive of Oakland, and mushrooms have been proven again and again and again and again to really, really help people with PTSD. Like, I feel like it's worth a shot. So that's where my head's at. Plotting my escape out of the country, but only after I have milked the state of California for all of the relevant resources that I can. That's where I'm at right now. I'm drinking chai tea and turmeric together. So it looks like soup. It looks like broth, but it tastes real good. Alrighty, we ready? Ed says, I think mushrooms can help humanity's consciousness if done with the right motivation. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah, I found out there's like different methods of microdosing. There's like 3 days on, 3 days off, or like you microdose for one day and then you take 2 days to sort of analyze how you're doing. Or you can microdose for like 3 days, you can microdose for 5 days, but then you always take a break and like see how you're doing. And apparently that has helped people with a variety of mental health issues. And going to therapy while doing that like can undo decades of trauma, apparently. I might just that might just be a larger priority than literally anything else in my life right now. Eating correctly, who needs it? Employment, yeah, right. Like, human relationships, spiritual fulfillment, no. I want to try microdosing shrooms while I go to therapy and live in the mountains. I should definitely try and read on mushrooms sometimes. And I wish you guys could hear this. Let me see if I can get the microphone up there. There's I have a small cactus. This turned into ASMR. This turned into ASMR real quick, but you guys need to hear this because it's really soothing. Hopefully you can hear it. Okay, I'll stop messing around. Let's actually read this chapter. Boy, oh boy. What happened in part 3 of chapter 10? Oh yeah, that's right. So they were like around a fireplace. Oh good, I'm glad you could hear it. They were around a fireplace and by fireplace I mean outdoor fireplace. They were around a bonfire and fucking Gary gave his bland as fuck, generic as fuck story about how his life was trash before he's like, oh, the movement saved my life. And he's really pent up and sexually frustrated. So he's all up in Carmen's face, talking into her cheek like they're dating, like they're about to hook up. He's like, don't you, you gotta love it. Just submit to the movement. And she's like, get away from me. And so finally she distracts him by saying, I need to find my shoes. And so he runs away with all of his sexual frustration to find these shoes as if it's the secret to him getting laid. And that's where we left off. And while Gary busied himself with searching for her track shoes in the grass, she walked on like a somnambulist, a sleepwalker, to the house. Chapter 11. That night, her father came to the door of the dormitory in the middle of the night. Remember, her father is dead. He didn't speak. He just stood there fidgeting in his old lived-in gardening trousers, smiling as if he was quietly pleased about something. The following afternoon, she sat in the dormitory on a hard-backed chair with a cluster of sisters around her. She fixed her eye on the green geometric pattern of the polished linoleum and watched the pattern of their dresses jostling one another, breaking up the symmetry of the floor covering, then watched the hanks of flaxen hair slither and trickle down her bare brown arm and wind into long curls at her feet. Listening to the crisp snip snip of the scissors close to her ears and the whispering of the sisters as they moved around her softly, giggling like excitable ghosts. What? The linoleum was as fascinating as a piece of malachite, the dark green line fading into a pale green line, the inner diamond darkening to frame a yellow center. Somewhere in the house, a girl's voice was singing Amazing Grace with a heartbreaking sweetness, and the plaintive, insistent tune compounded the mystery and the logic of the self-contained repeating shapes that jiggled up and down in her skin. Oh, fuck. Are you kidding me? I'm so upset right now. Okay. Just as everyone had told her, she felt extremely calm and clear. All the struggle, all the confusion, all the thudding pains in her head, and the irrational urges to laugh and cry at inappropriate moments, the sense of constant frenzied irritation, all these things that had been part of her prolonged futile resistance were gone. After the storm, the still small voice of calm. The revelation brought with it an overpowering sense of release, of letting go, and in its place there was an absolute conviction that, strange as it seemed, this actually was the truth. I don't like it. It was a frightening, awesome piece of knowledge, and as they said, once you knew it, you couldn't walk away. They tilted her chin this way and that to even up their ragged effort. As her eyes searched the ceiling, she wondered why she, of all people, had been chosen to receive it. Why couldn't God have just left her where she was? Are you saying she joined? This is dumb. I'm going to keep reading. Once her hair was neat and tidy, the way father liked it best, Carmen walked out to the stairwell with her bevy of giggling attendants. Her hand caressed the silk of the banister. She glided down towards the ring of upturned, joyful faces in the hall. They began to surge toward the base of the stairs, and familiar strains of Happy Rebirthday struck up from the piano. This is a nightmare. This is my nightmare. Son of a bitch. Okay. No. Then everyone began to clap and cheer, calling out speech, and she was overwhelmed by a sense of humility and gratitude that they should love her after she had fought so hard against them, after she had ridiculed for so long their sacred truth. Her voice became stronger and more sure as the applause died down. I'm just gonna, you know that gif of like Justin Timberlake when he's like, like that's just gonna be me the whole rest of this chapter. I'm just gonna be like, "Mm." Okay. Oh, Ed Kaufman says, did someone dose Carmen's drink with a microdose or something so she could have her dream, etc.? Oh, Jennifer says, don't worry. I hope she's faking it. I'm so distraught. I don't even want to keep reading it. Okay, I'll trust you guys that there will be an epic plot twist at the end. Okay. I hope Carmen and Lucy's mom comes to the place and like yells at everyone. That'd be gangster. Her voice became stronger and more sure as the applause died down. Lucy could only pick up the tail end of the breathless little speech. You know, the Bible says the truth will set you free. Well, I came here to listen to the greatest truth, and I can only tell you I feel a freedom now that I have never known before in my lifetime. She laughed in an exhilarated, joyful way that was infectious and made everyone else laugh too. They'd heard it so often before. The miracle that Principal could wreak on the most intransigent soul. There was an uproar of clapping and whistling. First Lucy, then Adele, then Jane, then Pamela stepped forward to kiss her. Then a melee of sisters did the same. A melee of sisters. Through the confusion, Carmen became aware of Gary in the crowd of beaming brothers. He was not smiling, but wearing a curious, haunted look. As she drew level, he reached out and pressed something in her hand, a photograph. I want you to have this. There's a space for it in the wallet, he said. It was a snap of him standing in the grounds. Wherever your mission takes you, you can always know I'm with you in spirit, praying for you and watching over you, even though we're far apart. She smiled at him, puzzled. Somehow she had imagined they would be able to spend more time together now. She sensed that her education was only just starting. There were a million secrets yet to learn, and she had imagined that Gary would be there beside her, along with Lucy, guiding her steps at her side as she peeled back each mysterious layer and moved towards the heart of the central mystery. Now it occurred to her that when the end of the 21-day came, she might be starting the 40-day without him. She saw that there were tears in his eyes. I'm so pleased, so proud, he began, but then he smiled as though words were quite inadequate to express it all. You'll understand when you have a spiritual child of your own. Aw, man. Y'all keep talking about the editing. Okay. And before she could ask him whether there wasn't a chance that their missions would bring them together, he stepped back to let Lucy stake her claim. Seeing the radiant pleasure beaming from Lucy's face, Carmen put it out of her mind. Lucy's arms were fiercely around her and their two faces pressed close. Carmen heard her whisper, "Oh, Carmen, now we're really sisters." Now we're sisters in the only true sense there is. Carmen answered her impulsively, overcome by the emotion of the moment, by the smiling, kindly faces all around them. It's so funny. I thought you were lost, but it's me who's found. I thought someone was trying to take you away, and all that's really happened is we've come together more completely. You didn't understand, Lucy cried. You thought I was being cold. You thought I didn't love you. It was only because I loved you so much that I worked so hard. Lucy laughed incredulously. You were just so difficult. You must have been one of the hardest ones we've ever had. I heard you were pretty difficult yourself, interrupted Robert. She turned and retorted good-humoredly. It took me 2 days, not 2 weeks. She made a comic face and everyone laughed along with her. This has to be like a daydream. This has to be like a nightmare that she's going to wake up from. This is too canned. This can't be real. Duh. Okay. So whack. She turned back to Carmen and took her hands. Remember how I always used to rely on you? Lucy asked, her voice choked with emotion. Now I feel like I've been able to pay some of that back. Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it just the best experience you've ever known? Carmen hugged her even tighter. It's wonderful, she whispered, and the most wonderful thing is we can share it even more completely than everything we've shared before. The next moment, the crowd jostled in, and suddenly everyone was laughing, and their arms were all intertwined as the sound of a joyful song began. Tears rolled unashamedly down Carmen's face as she gave her heart to the words. I wish for you, my friend, the happiness that I've found. On him you can depend. It matters not where you're bound. I shouted at the mountaintop. I want the world to know. The Lord of Love has come to me. I want to pass it on. There's the motherfucking song that Gary keeps repeating. Ed says, I joined in 1978 full-time. 24th of 24/7 365. I was trying to read that like a date. Based on one dream only. So yes, this makes me sick. It's those dreams, man. They keep trying to say that they mean more than they do. What if you just had indigestion? What if it was just the power of suggestion? Speaking of things that rhyme with indigestion. People have dumb dreams all the time for really dumb reasons. I mean, you should change your whole life. Although I'd be lying if I said I never changed my life based on a dream. It seemed to her in that ecstatic moment, with all the brothers and sisters around her, shaking their linked arms, raising the spirit with their massed voices, that there never had been a love like it, that there could be no more glorious way to spend one's life than in sharing and passing on this overpowering experience, nothing more humbling or more exalting than to give one's life to the Lord of the Second Advent. I hadn't heard that in forever. Nothing more awesome or mysterious or enthralling than to give one's heart to the Lord of Love. They say we're brainwashed, Robert thundered indignantly in the lecture. Well, don't our brains need a little scrub? Don't we need to get the Dettol and the brushes into those deep, dark corners of the soul, scour it out before we can let the purifying air of the Messiah in? Because even our brains aren't safe from Satan, are they? And if the Messiah's mission is to succeed on earth, then we mustn't have contact with Satan, must we? And yet that's difficult because where is Satan? Everywhere, the answer came back darkly. Yes, he's everywhere, outside there in the fallen world. And Satan uses emotional blackmail and deception. Satan has always used those tools to rule the world. So many times, someone's physical mother will ring a member in the center and say, you ought to come home now, you've heard enough. Maybe this woman will say, come home, I'm in the hospital. Or they'll even tell you, your physical father's dying and he wants you near. But how many times have we found that it was Satan speaking, using that physical parent to snatch the child back from the truth? This is why we have to be so careful not to confuse real love, the Messiah's perfect love, with a selfish love that wants only to pollute us and gain control. So establishing the us versus them, anyone can be infected by the hive mind of Satan, so you need to stay infected with the hive mind of worshiping Reverend Moon. Don't trust what any of these motherfuckers say, including your own kin. We're the only family that matters now. I'm surprised they haven't gotten to the part where they tell people to literally cut their wrists open rather than be kidnapped by their family, because that was something they touched on in Ticket to Heaven, and I don't feel like that has been emphasized enough. But then again, why would it be in an introductory workshop if it takes the whole workshop just to get to the blessing part? Anywho, wow, these videos on YouTube are never going to be monetized ever. Unless I market this as like an adult podcast. Carmen was trying to concentrate on his words, but her mind kept returning to the letter that she had to write. There had already been 4 or 5 drafts, and Gary had tried to help her with it, but it was so hard. How could she possibly explain the great wave that had overwhelmed terms that her mother might understand? Besides which, her mother was still happily under the impression that she was bobbing up and down on a pony somewhere in Talibant on Usk. Excuse me. I feel like that's a British phrase, like bumblefuck nowhere. Talibant on Usk. It's like hyphenated. Anyway, she couldn't hope to convince her mother of what had been revealed to her, the importance of the whole thing for the human race. She was only just coming to terms with it herself. How could someone unprepared, who had not heard principle, even hope to get a glimmer of understanding? The letter so far ran, Dear Mother, first a piece of really good news. Lucy is safe and happy. More than that, I've never seen her so happy or well in all her life. It may surprise you that I am not in Wales, but down in Somerset, and that I came here to do a bit of investigating for myself. As we thought, Lucy is with Unification Church, but imagine my surprise when I found that they were really a nice, friendly crowd and just the sort of people you would have wanted her to meet. They do a lot of good work rescuing drug addicts and working with disadvantaged children. Carmen had balked slightly at this, but Gary insisted that she write it in, that she deceive her own mom, basically. What were the new recruits but disadvantaged children suffering under Satan's rule of sin? And as for the drug addicts, many people in the guilt sessions had admitted to smoking dope at parties. Not exactly the same as being a drug addict, boo boo, but okay. George says dreams were set on the people's subconsciousness for a reason. I wonder, did the Moonies use the Bible to deceive? I ask because that doctrine does not make sense. I wasn't part of the cult. Yeah, Moonies would like predict, like they would accurately predict the physical effects of being traumatized and coerced, but say that those symptoms meant spiritual things. So dreams, sometimes when you start a new job, you start a new full-time job where you do the same task day in and day out, and then within the first week you're having dreams about doing that job. So I had a sales job where they said, has anyone dreamed about doing sales yet? And like they would kind of try to make it mean something, but not really, because everybody could. It wasn't a church. Like they weren't trying to keep people who worshiped the manager. They weren't trying to keep people who were that unhinged that they tried to make this like a spiritual sales company. But imagine like the Moonies did that. It's like they know all of the like telltale signs of people doing that last fight for their personal autonomy, and then they say that it means something spiritual. People start having dreams because they're doing the same tasks over and over again, talking about the same crazy shit over and over again, and then they say when you have those dreams, that's a sign that we're correct and you're wrong and that you're selected for this church. It's sort of like if you were slipping something into somebody's food and you're like, you know what? Based on this irrelevant thing that you've said to me in this conversation while you're eating, you're going to get stomach aches tomorrow. And when you do, that'll be God punishing you. And it's like, little do you know that they're like slipping shit into your food. Like that type of thing. It's gaslighting. Very thorough, well thought out gaslighting. Although I'm sure the members there believe that it really is spiritual shit because the same thing was done to them. And they're very idealistic and hardworking. Now for my other piece of news. This may surprise you, but it wouldn't if you'd met the group of friends I'm with. Carmen wasn't at all sure about the uncharacteristic jolly tone or the exclamation marks he wanted her to use, but it seemed to be the house style in the One World family. This was the kind of letter that they were advised to write so as not to alarm their physical parents or bring persecution down upon the family. She sighed. No matter how meticulous she drafted and redrafted the letter, she knew with bitter resignation that her mother would just never understand. If Satan can even work through our physical families, we have to be cautious, don't we? Robert was saying. The members nodded solemnly. Carmen gave a guilty jolt and tried very hard to stop thinking about her mother in the letter because it was always possible that it was someone else who was putting those thoughts in her head. We can take a tip from Satan's book here. We're justified in using the same tools that Satan used to thwart God's plan. We used love like a fishing rod to bring someone to Father. He demonstrated hooking someone gently and reeling them in. But if that person isn't pure enough to accept the Messiah, that's when we use love like a weapon. He made a slicing movement through the air. That's when we have to cut them off. This is the meaning of heavenly deception. Satan deceived the human race into 6,000 years of misery, and now God uses Satan's methods to try to bring his children back. So that's what's interesting is like Carmen is starting to doubt her own thoughts. And that to this day is like the biggest symptom for me after leaving the cult is like you are introduced to the idea that some thoughts are bad. Some thoughts are pure evil and put there by a destructive force that is always wrong and always disgusting. And at any given moment, a person, a thought, an action can be motivated by the most disgusting, evil, be from a source of goodness. Like there's no room for just learning things and accepting things as they are and accepting people as they are and like accounting for nuance and like diversity of perspectives. Like there is only the source of all evil that started all suffering and is the cause of all current suffering, or the source of all goodness that is the antithesis of suffering. And they cannot coexist in the same space. And every decision you make is either one or the other. Like there's no neutral, none of that. Yep. Emmy saying so they use the Bible and other religious doctrines to defend their way of thinking. Ed Kaufman says the mother figure said, if I ask for a dream in 3 days, I would have one. That's what happened. We were taught not to trust our own conscience. George says that's so dope. I definitely every cult has its way to deceive. I was part of the cult created by Mr. Moon's disciple, who is Lee Man-hee, and they deceived us with parables of the Bible. Oh, what's the name of that cult? I didn't even know Moon had a disciple named Lee Man-hee. We always talked about Mr. Park or Colonel Park. Also, has anyone learned Korean after being abused by Koreans? It's like, is that weird? I feel like you can get a good job teaching English in Korea, but it's like, is that too predictable? Is that just like repeating the situation of trauma? Right? Forget it's like, but I don't want to insult Korea. Like I don't blame Korean the language or Korean culture or current day Korean people for the actions of some psychopath who was already arrested multiple times and basically chased out of Korea, which is why he had to move his bullshit religion overseas. Like I get it. Like they're not proud of him either. I don't know. I think I need to stay away from diving too deep into Korean culture for a little while anyway. Right? Bulgogi and kimchi. Kimchi is popping. Have you ever tried like fusion food too? Like bulgogi tacos, bulgogi burritos. Like there's a couple like food companies on the West Coast that combine like Korean and Spanish food. It's pretty bomb. Anyway, I'm like stalling because this is so fucking depressing. Come on, Carmen. Okay. Man. So when you're talking to your physical families, don't tell them too much. Don't tell them things that might alarm them. Use your love to try to lead them to the church. But if your physical parents answer you by speaking against the family, then remember what Jesus said to Mary when she tried to hold him back. He told her, "Go away now, mother. I have no time for you. I am doing the work of my Father." This is what our attitude must be. The words of Jesus tell us, hate your mother, hate your father. For if your physical family tried to hold you back, then they're no longer the side of God, but on the side of Satan. What we have here is a heavenly emergency, and each of us has to know in our hearts that nothing will stop us from fulfilling our part in the restoration, capital. This is the revelation, capital R, who knows the Messiah, capital M, and yet turns his back, and that person is cursed and doubled cursed. He's cursed by Satan and he's cursed by the Messiah. For such a person, there's no way forward and there's no way back. What does that even mean? What are you saying? No way forward and no. You mean they're not going to be able to pay rent anymore? They're not going to be able to make any more friends outside of you? Like, what do you mean there's no way forward, no way back? Their credit score will be destroyed. They'll have a criminal record. Like, what are you saying? I remember when I used to take these empty threats so goddamn seriously. And it's like, but what did you actually just say, though? Oh, the Shincheonji Church of Jesus. Church of Jesus. And Mr. Shincheonji uses HWPL, which is a peace organization associated to the United Nations, and they use it as a way to introduce themselves to other countries. Okay, Jennifer, I'm waiting for your best thought experiment. Comment section is poppin'. Okay. I think, yeah, I used to be so threatened by the emotion behind these empty phrases, like there's no way forward, no way back, like your whole family will be attacked by evil spirits. But it's like now that I am confident that I'm developing a personality outside of my cult persona, I'm developing an outsider brain and I'm able to look at all of this objectively. I'm like, what the fuck are you actually saying though? I would like to see you follow through with this thing that you just tried to threaten me with. I would like to see you do that right now, please. Oh, that's right, you can't. Because you're not saying anything. Like, um, imagine I'm unconditionally loved by an eternal source of love. Yeah, that's a good thought experiment. I do that pretty often. You just create the emotion that you want to experience in yourself first. That's really, really helpful. That's a good thought experiment to keep. For such a person, there's no way forward and there's no way back. His soul can only spiral in the abyss like a stone falling into a bottomless well. Like, what the fuck did you just say? What does that mean? Okay, then we'll fuck around and find out who's right when we die. Like, okay. Carmen was giving him her full attention now. These words seemed so mournful, the fate so inexorable and hopeless. How much more lost is the man who turns a heavenly child from father because nothing can protect him from the spirit legion's attack? It's better even for such a man that he should die. Better that than to cause a family member to forsake the Lord of the second advent. Yes, in God's eyes, this is a crime far worse than murder. Better that a man should be murdered than that he loses everlasting soul. Sometimes selfish parents come to try to drag their physical children back to the satanic world by force. That's how frightened people are of purity. This is why many of our brothers learn karate, because for their own sakes, these people have to be prevented. They have no idea of what damage they take upon their souls. So, if we love our parents, we don't let them put themselves in danger. If we love our physical parents, we have to protect them from themselves. And then Carmen decided how she would finish off the letter. She would say none of the things she wanted so much to explain about the struggle and the confusion and the blinding light that had hit her in the darkness. She would say nothing about Satan or of the fallen world or father, but only try to make her mother more inquisitive and see if she couldn't get her to assent her. The thought of giving up her mother was quite unthinkable. She couldn't countenance it all. She couldn't countenance it all. She understood now why Lucy hadn't been in touch after she met the family. Lucy had been frightened of weakening, frightened of putting them all into a danger that they couldn't understand. That evening, Carmen sealed her bland little missive and gave it to Adele. Adele had already checked it and declared it satisfactory. A lot of implications there. Then she went and sat cross-legged in the family evening and tried to put her mother from her mind. But even so, a tear rolled down her face because she knew that this was only the beginning of what the Messiah asked of her. Gary's group came on and began their skit. She hugged her feet and cheered with all the rest. It was a motley cast, all dressed in bizarre improvised costumes. Peter and Franklin were gangsters, Reg was an unlikely looking punk, and Jane was a loose woman smoking a pretend cigarette and lolling about in decadent fashion with a glass of Ribena. Then Robert came on with a bucket, assisted by Gary, who bore a chamois leather washcloth. They sat the clients down in the waiting chairs, and as the audience waited with mounting anticipation for the punchline, Robert and Gary began to scrub the clients' heads in a choreographed circular movement. Both clients and washers began to echo the same circular motion with their hands, singing to the tune of Old MacDonald. Reverend Mooney had a farm. Yeah, and on that farm he had sinners. It's sending me. Oh my god. The clients stood up, pretending to be blank as zombies, while Robert and Gary scrubbed their heads frantically with the scrubbing brushes, with the brainwash here and a brainwash there, here a wash, there a wash, everywhere a brainwash. And it's funny because we would tell similar jokes, just more relevant to the time that I was growing up. People weren't getting kidnapped and nobody was accusing us of brainwashing anymore because no one cared about us because they forgot about us, but we still pretended everyone was persecuting us and still did dumb skits like this and still sang songs to the tune of Old MacDonald. Like, I'm laughing because it's 100% accurate. It's so weird that both cults have their compounds on the same expanse of property in a lake in South Korea. Is that Chungpyeong? Are you telling me Reverend Moon like allowed these other branches of his same religion to exist and just acted like they weren't helping him buy property in Chungpyeong? I need more deets in the comments below, please. That's crazy. The audience erupted with screams of appreciation, and everyone held with laughter, holding their stomachs, hooting until they were weak. Carmen laughed too. Their faces were so funny. Gary and Robert frowning with desperate sincerity. Jane, Franklin, Peter, and Reg all staring out past the audience, looking glazed and gormless. The laughter was infectious and irresistible, even though most of the members had seen the sketch many times before. They laughed and laughed until the tears streamed down their cheeks. I kind of feel like laughter creates the space to release the same emotions as crying. And I've definitely had times where I probably needed to cry and like scream and like release a lot more emotions, and then something makes me laugh and it's like the next thing you know you're laughing so hard you can't breathe and there are like tears rolling down your face and you're like, oh, my body has taken this crack in my stoicism to release all of this emotion. And it kind of feels like that's what's happening here, and I think they alluded to that when all of them were watching Joan of Arc and like crying uncontrollably at a movie that wasn't even that good, you know? Like, it's a good movie, but like not that good that so many people who'd seen it so many times before would sob uncontrollably, you know? That was the great thing in the family. Unlike the outside world where people got jaded and indifferent when they'd seen something a few times, inside the family, the more you saw or heard something repeated, the more intense that thing became. Carmen felt the buoyancy of their mutual reassurance and their optimism. She felt again the power of the very special kind of love in that room, and it made everything else fade away to nothing. She decided not to think about her mother. That was a problem. No, not a problem, a challenge she was yet to meet. If she faced up to what the Messiah would require from her, it would take all her mental strength and it would spoil the day. After all, it was her day. The past was over. Everything that had gone on before was unimportant. This was day one. Her entire life started from today. Then she began to make the circular washing movement like the rest of them, and her eyes sparkled as she took up the jovial refrain. 38 minutes. How many pages we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This will take another hour. What do you guys think? Should I keep reading chapter 12? I'm going to wait until you respond. I think there's a delay in the stream. Let me know if I should keep reading chapter 12 or if we should save it for next week. I see a yes. Okay. Okay. Chapter 12. Carmen's mother sat in the dingy waiting room, stroking her jugular in a strained, neurotic fashion, and then shredding a paper handkerchief into tiny feathers of lint that stuck to her beige pleated skirt. Man, Carmen really did join. The Christmas tinsel hung torn and half-hearted across the grimy picture rail, and the receptionist cards sat on the unlit parlor stove, although it was several days past 12th night. Unlucky, thought Ellen automatically, but when she thought about it, she'd always been careful to take her own cards down on time, and fate had still seen fit to visit on her every kind of weird bad luck. After all, it wasn't common to have two daughters disappear in the space of a year. Since then, what? One strained, surreal visit where the two prodigals sat on the settee like light strangers, regarding her with secret, unfamiliar eyes, occasional chirpy postcards full of exclamation marks but lacking any information, and one packet of ginseng tea that had arrived in the post unannounced and unaccompanied by any word of explanation. So much. Oh, you know what I bet they did? I bet they blessed that ginseng tea and they were like, here you go, mom. Bro, like people in the ex Mooney like Facebook group, they don't understand how harmful it was for like, thank you. They didn't understand how harmful it was for like church members to abandon their family. Like they didn't understand what that was like for family members. Um and it's like people will discover something that alludes to how this mom felt and they're like, "Are you seeing this? Are you seeing these lies?" And it's like, "Sweetie, they're not lies. Like Reverend Moon told you they were lies, but like other people's emotions are valid and other people's perception of the Moonies is based on. And now that you're out of the church, you're allowed to read those facts. They're not pretty, they're ugly as hell. Like there's a reason the Unification Church was such a famous cult because we deserved it, right? Um, what else was I gonna say? Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to like the outsider politicians. There was like a mayor in New Jersey who had both daughters leave. I mean, this is too relevant. Like just recently I reached out to non-church member relatives in Australia that I'm talking to for the first time and I'm like, "Yeah, my mom never told me about you." Because according to her, her past doesn't exist. Yeah, Moonies, good question, Anthony Reyes. Moonies don't actually ever officially excommunicate ex-members. They're always trying to get people back. They never really close that door. Other churches like Scientology and Jehovah's Witness, especially, like your family cannot talk to you if you become an apostate. This is going to be like almost 2 hours long. Okay. Oh yeah, that was the other thing I was gonna say. Sometimes they would bless candy with holy wine and not tell the people they were giving it to. And there's even like a church member who dumped several bottles of holy wine into their city's municipal water supply to try to bless everyone. Like they would spray holy wine and holy salt on their Halloween candy and then give it to people to like bless people. Just non-consensually putting spiritual wine and spiritual totems around. Insane, dude. So much time had passed, yet time hadn't diminished Ellen's sense of unreality or made it easier to accept and understand. And now, at last, Carmen had deigned to come again, but this time she had come alone. Her news was that Lucy had left for North America to become a missionary with the International One World Crusade. Carmen seemed to have no idea when or if she was ever coming back, nor did she seem to care. A cross-eyed boy was running around the surgery, completely out of control, careering into the old lady's outstretched, arthritic limbs. He was overseen by a charmless girl with cold sores on her lip. She looked about 14, but nursed a puling baby and rocked another in a battered Silver Cross pram, complete with rusty springs and egg stains. It was exactly the same pram, thought Ellen, that she and Tom had bought when she was expecting Carmen. It had a high-sprung carriage and a fringed canopy. She could remember the summer's day when they'd gone out to buy it. How bright and hopeful everything had seemed then, as they'd stood looking into that shop window, arm in arm. Can you imagine your husband dies in a car crash and then both your daughters get, like, their brains eaten by the Moonies? Like, fuck my life, dude. Ellen's having a rough time. Now Ellen started methodically plucking the fragments of tissue from her skirt and pulverizing them with her fingertips. She wondered if it was a good sign Carmen had been closeted with him for so long. She even nursed a forlorn hope that the doctor might hold some magic key to it all, might spring her mind open like a stubborn lock on a suitcase, and that Carmen would appear in the doorway, grinning sheepishly, perfectly normal once again. I still get weird. Emmy says I still get weird flashbacks when I get groceries. Like I need to holy salt the groceries. Oh, wait. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to forget about holy salt for a long time. Melissa says, I knew someone that used needles to dip in holy wine and then poke hard candies to secretly bless people. Exactly. Ed Kaufman says, the subcult portrayed in Ticket to Heaven was based on a power structure with 3 siblings at the top, right below the Korean leader. I don't remember there being a subcult in Ticket to Heaven. Cool. In reality, Ellen knew these wild fantasies were just that, and all she could realistically hope for would be an element of doubt and a psychiatric referral. The next problem would be to keep hold of Carmen long enough to make her see it through. But the doctor must surely see for himself the frightening limitations of her new vocabulary, the curious shrinking that went on in her eyes, the extraordinary blank equanimity of the new robotic Carmen. This last hope faded as, with a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, she heard the healthy peal of Carmen's laughter through the thin partition walls, followed by the low timbre of the doctor's laugh. The 2 voices sounded so easy and relaxed that they might have been the voices of 2 old friends reminiscing, and Ellen wondered what they could possibly find the laugh about. At length, Carmen reappeared, glowing with good health and smiling. She looked at Ellen, or did Ellen imagine it, with a slightly ironic arc of the eyebrow. She sat down sedately beside her. He'd like a word with you now. Ellen fussed to her feet, brushing off the paper pieces, dropping her gloves, and tipping up her handbag so that it emptied a clatter of coins upon the floor. You go, I'll pick them up, said Carmen kindly, and she knelt to collect together the cache of coins. Honestly, Mum, there's nothing to be nervous about. Ellen stared dumbly at her, tempted to reach out and clip her smartly around the ear. Maybe a blow to the head was the only way to force the needle of the stuck record past the groove, but she resisted the urge and only walked with as much dignity as she could muster into the consulting room, knowing already that it was hopeless. Carmen sat there making big eyes at the baby, dandling its rattle, but the infant was lackluster, smeared with oatmeal and nose drip. Its blue sleep suit was stained with food. Carmen listened with a sympathetic air to the conversations going on around her, to the mother's peevish complaints about the housing office, the benefits, and the social services. But though she nodded and tutted cordially, her eyes were alert and dancing with the secret knowledge that it was all unnecessary suffering, that she could just lean forward to the girl who was whining now about the dangers of the lift shafts and whisper to her, I know a way to solve every one of these problems, and it doesn't lie with the welfare state. How would the girl react? What if she told everyone of those depressed, sick people, young and old, that their sickness wasn't of the flesh, but of the spirit? That almost every sickness could be overcome by working hard and by chanting Father's name? How would they respond? Her eyes lit up at the thought. It seemed intolerably sad that the truth had to be revealed so slowly, that one couldn't just impart it quickly in hurried conversation. Hey, trust me, I can change your life. I have the answers to the questions that have plagued mankind through history. Who would believe her? And yet she hugged herself the wonderful, and yet she hugged to herself the wonderful, the incredible, the impossible knowledge that had been vouchsafed to her, the most earth-shattering secret that the world had ever known. Who would believe that she, simple, ordinary Carmen Stone, was one of the chosen few trusted to propagate it, thereby helping to restore her physical family, her nation, and the world itself? Oh my God. It almost made her want to leap up there and then and begin to teach principle to this little band of people with their fearful, worried eyes. She felt like shouting out loud to them, look, there's no need to be unhappy. Throw away your medication and your walking aids and your doomy, gloomy faces. There's very little time. We're in the last days now, and it's no time to be complaining about your high rises and leading your self-centered, satanic lives. We're moving towards the defeat of communism now. We're moving towards the Third World War. The kingdom of heaven is coming on earth, and it's coming soon. Change your hearts where there's still time. How marvelous it would be when the time came that people could hear principle immediately without the preparation of the courses. If that were the case, the waiting room of Satan's children would surge up after her, and she would lead them down the road and off their housing estates like the Pied Piper, leaving Hamlin. Even as she sat there, she felt so high. She felt high all the time. To live life at such a pitch was a privilege granted to few people. Her life now was a breathless, relentless, ceaseless campaign to sell more copies of One World. For real, though, I miss that high. I've been thinking about it, and it's like when I get really, really low and sad, it's because I'm not special. We're not saving the world. Utopia is not within reach. Like, in fact, the people who sold me Utopia did it to take years of my life and millions of dollars. Like, it was all a dream. I used to read Word Up magazine. Oh, I love the stuff going on in the comments. Oh, Emmy, your mom was handing out like spiritually blessed hard candies at your wedding without your permission. That is truly some first gen movie Mooney behavior. That is some brainwashed behavior. Hello, Tender Lungs. Hello, Anthony. Hello, propaganda. I don't know what animism is. But it's like when you've been high, like Carmen is right now, like the members get when they have the eyes roll back in the head, and you have like maybe I should do that 8 more times. Eyes roll back in the head. and you like, and you feel that spiritual high. It's like I was describing. Like it's when people get high for the first time. You're like, oh my God, I matter so much. I'm here to save the world. And now I don't feel high like that all the time. And marijuana is the only thing that makes me happy. It's like physically, you miss the high, you miss the purpose. You're like, life is an exciting crusade. Oh, just kidding. No, it's not. It's a collection of mundane tasks and routines, and everything is being made up as we go along, and that's all that life is. That's all it is. It's like you have to remind yourself how bland and boring it is. And I'm trying to get myself to like stability and just blandness all the time. Yep. Jennifer says a lot of sincere people's energy was wasted for the benefit of a handful of Koreans. Ugh. Yes. Although I hesitate to even use Korean as like the combining factor. Narcissists of every color being paid by narcissists who are white, collecting money from the Republican Party, donating money from the Republican Party, and Democrats alike. Oh, animism. Interesting. Okie doke. Where was I? How many more pages? This is it, y'all. When these pages are done, this book is over and I'll have to figure out a new thing to do on YouTube. I'll have to actually like edit videos, like invest some time, maybe. Where was it? She was saying that she was high. Oh, yeah. Look, there's no need to be unhappy. Throw away your medication and your walking aids and your doomy, gloomy faces. There's very little time. We're in the last days now, and it's no time to be complaining about your high rises and leading your self-centered satanic lives. We're moving towards the defeat of communism now. We're moving towards the Third World War. The kingdom of heaven is coming on earth, and he's coming soon. Change your hearts where there's still time. How marvelous it would be when the time came that people could hear principle immediately without the preparation of the courses. If that were the case now, this whole waiting room of Satan's children would surge up after her and she would lead them down the road and off their houses. Oh yeah, off their housing estates like the Pied Piper, leaving Hamlin. Even as she sat there, she felt so high. She felt high all the time. To live life at such a pitch was a privilege granted to few people. Her life now was a breathless, relentless, ceaseless campaign to sell more copies of One World. At 5 a.m., she would jump out of bed and, like the others, prostrate herself before father's portrait, repeating the pledge to give her life to father and Korea. Valid, used to do that all the time. From then on, it was all uphill, shouting her impossible financial goal, each day more ambitious than the last, pouring with her sisters from the bus onto the street corner, praying all the time to reach her target. Also valid, that has been me before as well. The work, far from making one exhausted, made one more alive. All the time, her heart would be thud, thud, thudding with urgency, the importance of their greater goal. It was no longer an effort to cut off satanic, selfish thoughts, because if you worked with the ferocity that father demanded, there was no time for the fallen thoughts even to surface. That's called thought stopping techniques and thought eliminating cliches. Thought terminating cliches. Oh, my Lanta. And all the time, father's words would pound in her head as she stood on the inhospitable pavements. We must be like a big selling operation. Unless we work like a big machine, how will we bring in the harvest? It costs at least £1 a head to bring a person to re-education. So how many million pounds do we need to re-educate everyone in England? How will we finance the restoration unless we give every ounce of our strength? This is how we have to feel, that the whole restoration depends on ourselves alone. So bigger, better, wilder goals, more effort, forget the blisters, their Heavenly Father's badges, and then the corresponding bitter tears, the sense of worthlessness and failure if the target wasn't reached. It was all she could do not to whip out the copies of One World from her duffel bag and start selling straight away in the surgery. Like I said before, it's like I once walked into a store that was being held up at gunpoint. Should I save their souls real quick? Should I just take this moment to tell them, you idiots, the Messiah's here. Just give me your money. I'll save your soul. Like, no, there's a time and a place where shit is not appropriate. I'm glad I had the sanity to tell that to myself. I'm glad I had a little baby outside personality. Her fingers drummed under the seat of her hardback chair. Her mother was being an awfully long time. She hoped the doctor would set her mind at rest. Something of Carmen's elation faded at the thought. It seemed to Carmen that her mother was becoming rather neurotic and edgy and looking older. Of course, Lucy's abrupt departure hadn't helped. Carmen had tried to get it across to her just what an inspirational opportunity it was for Lucy, but her mother had only wanted to look at it from a selfish point of view, shrugging listlessly and handing Carmen the greeting cards she'd been writing out for Lucy's birthday, suggesting that Carmen forward it to America when she learned the exact address. Carmen had studied the glossy picture, a basket of roses dotted with forget-me-nots under a big gilt flourish that spelled, "To my darling daughter." It had been on the tip of her tongue to reassure her mother that Lucy honestly wouldn't mind if it was late because she no longer celebrated her physical birthday. Jesus Christ, neither did my mom or dad. They didn't celebrate their physical birthday. The birthday was just a reminder of her shameful blood inheritance and hardly a matter for celebration. But then Carmen had caught the haunted look in her mother's face and thought better of saying anything. She wished her mother would make more effort to see it from someone else's point of view. Lucy hadn't necessarily gone abroad forever, and even if it turned out that way, Carmen couldn't see how it particularly affected her mother, who never saw her anyway, at home or abroad. For herself, she hardly thought about Lucy now. She tried not to. Whenever she thought about her, she was aware that a stubborn twinge of feeling persisted, despite the fact that a lot of time had passed since they'd cut each other off. At first, they just stopped acknowledging the fact that they were physical sisters. But later came the hard part when they'd set out to erase their sense of emotional connection, which was an unwelcome byproduct of their shared satanic blood. That's crazy. Eventually, they would discipline themselves to love one another no more and no less than any other family member. But in the meantime, they represented to each other a constant source of danger and were best apart. I think they couldn't even convince people to keep acting like that once the second generation were born. But I guess it's different for second gen than it is for first gen, who have this narrative of being sinful. That's crazy. Carmen had thought recently that she was beginning to make progress, particularly since Lucy was on the other side of the Atlantic, but now she wasn't quite so sure. Her mother would keep harping on and on about Lucy in the past all the time, and it wasn't helpful. After all, what was so riveting about the past that they had to keep going over and over it? Inside the consulting room, Ellen was sitting hunched, listening miserably to the doctor's homily. He reasoned with her in a soft, censorial tone. Of course, sometimes it's very hard to let our children go, especially when we come to middle life. He made it sound like some dreary, inevitable illness, although Ellen was an elegant and youthful 45. The childbearing years are over. The nest is empty, and sometimes that causes a certain amount of regret, a feeling of emptiness. It takes some adjusting to, admittedly, but it's no good hanging on to them. Clinging sometimes forces them further away. You know, the wisest mother is the one who can say, "You're free to make of your own life what you will. You're free to learn from your own mistakes." Oh, so now the doctor's like gaslighting her about her kids being brainwashed. As he expounded his tedious problem page analysis, he warmed to his theme, taking her silence for submissive acceptance. She felt an overwhelming desire to reach across the desk, to seize him by his pressed lapels, and shake him till his perfect bridge work rattled. Her natural reverence for the medical profession warred with her seething resentment at the patronizing assumptions of this handsome young man with his manicured hands and his ski pole poking mischievously out from behind the somber medical cupboard. It was the multi-purpose midlife crisis speech, Women for the Instruction of. And the most insulting thing about it, beyond the fact that he simply wouldn't accept her assessment of her own daughter, was that there was a great mass of women who'd grown to middle age and who could still expect to be submitted to a lecture on life by some privileged young blade from social class A who had no firsthand knowledge of the thing as it was lived. She was aware of a dull sense of humiliation. His charming insouciance, I don't know what that is, filled her with rage, but it was important for her to control herself because he was her only option and she needed him on her side. You don't understand, she repeated. This isn't any normal sort of problem. I'm not frightened of losing them. I'm frightened when I see how much they've changed. The Carmen you just saw isn't the one who went away. She tried to keep any note of desperation from her voice. It seems to me she's undergone some kind of personality change. She's locked away inside herself, somewhere where she can't be reached. I can't explain it, but everything, her language, her thought process, her reasoning ability. The doctor stirred. His sympathy was waning. Yes, he objected. That's all very well, but basically what you're saying is that your daughter believes something you don't believe, and therefore she's mentally ill. If we all followed that logic through, the wards would be full of Jews and Catholics. He left the implications floating, and that's a scenario we've heard somewhere before. Ellen sat back, defeated. What exactly is it you're asking me to do? He asked in a voice that seemed more kindly. She made one last effort. Please, couldn't you just let a psychiatrist examine her? Let someone see her who understands these things. There are people who understand it, apparently. The doctor's eyebrows knitted. The slur on the breadth of his medical knowledge only increased his irritation, besides which Ellen was impassioned, and he was not trained to differentiate between passion and clinical hysteria. For all he knew, this was just one of a long line of hysterical women out there in the crowded waiting room. Carmen had been a breath of fresh air in comparison with the normal run of things. He spoke emphatically. Why should I recommend a perfectly healthy young woman, sound in wind and limb, perfectly rational, and if I may say so, with an engaging sense of humor, for a psychiatric appraisal? What possible use would it serve? Now, he said firmly, I'm going to give you a letter. Well, am I crazy? Carmen asked serenely, but Ellen only swept up her bag and gloves and swung out of the glass door towards the street, leaving Carmen to skip after her. In the high street, Ellen kept pretending to look in shop windows to check the state of her red, blotched face. Carmen hovered behind her, shifting uneasily. She no longer had any interest in material goods and the banks of clocks, and the jewelers only reminded her that she was wasting precious time, that the minutes were ticking away, that every hour made a day, and every day was crucially important. So, even though she wanted to comfort her mother, even though she wanted to say something that would cheer her up, she could hear the perpetual, incessant voice nagging in her head. Hurry, hurry. The only way you can help your mother is to get her to a center. That's the only long-term way to make her happy. The restoration of the world will make her infinitely more happy than a new clock could ever make her. Your desire to make your mother happy, that's a selfish, individualistic a desire that'll take too long to fulfill. That's a desire that's puny in relation to the greater overall world goal. Whereas the defeat of communism, that is something that's still within our grasp. The Third World War is in our sights now. Satan and God will have their final conflict on the holy battleground of Korea. When you've offered yourself to die for the sake of the world, when you've vowed to be a living sacrifice, then nothing in Satan's world must make you swerve from your course. All this was going round and round in Carmen's head like a complete lecture as Ellen vainly streaked and smeared the wet makeup round her eyes, reflected back in the shop window. Did he prescribe me something? Carmen queried. No, said Ellen. He said you were short of vitamin C, overtired, and mentally confused. Her gloved hand in her pocket crumpled up the letter that referred the mother, not the daughter, to the psychiatric clinic. Wow, that's shicey as hell. That's rude as fuck. Yeah, hysterical women. Exactly. Like, what the fuck is hysteria? They pathologized women being upset at men. The psychology slash psychiatry slash sociology fields got completely undermined by the cult apologetics network. They absolutely did. She poked a vindictive finger through the diazepam prescription. That's odd, Carmen reflected thoughtfully. I don't feel confused. I've never felt so calm and clear in all my life. Yes, that's what he thinks is odd, snapped Ellen, avoiding her eye. Carmen smiled beatifically to herself. She wondered if Jesus' disciples had been sent to physicians, and she thought they probably had. They wandered down the street, neither of them observing anything around them for different reasons. For Carmen, the whole street was bristling with satanic vibrations that she always sensed when she was out in the fallen world. Ellen felt so depressed and at her wits' end that she was past caring about anything other than the problem. The sky was bleak. Only a few bare stripling trees reached the sky to their protective wired cages. The human figures in the urban landscape stared fixedly at their boots, faces pinched and blue with cold. Did he have any advice? Asked Carmen solicitously, as though the problem under discussion was something she could help with. Yes, said Ellen tersely. He suggested I join a parent support group. Oh, what a great idea, Carmen beamed, and then she appeared to think about it. But hey, look, I know, why join just any old parent support group when we run an absolutely fantastic one of our own? She pretended to turn it over in her mind and then find the idea good. Yeah, she said, as if it had only just struck her what a perfect proposition it was. It wouldn't be difficult for you to get to the center, or maybe they'd send a minibus, and there's singing and games, and lots of different people with different outlooks on life, lots of other parents trying to learn more about what their kids are into. You might find it really gave a boost to your social life. Ellen eyed this ghastly imposter, masquerading as her daughter, with a stony stare. Thank you very much, Carmen, she said bitterly. I think I'll find one for myself if it's all the same to you. If I wanted to join an alcoholic support group, I wouldn't join one associated with the licensed victualers. Victualers. I'm guessing that's another word for like liquor. You do seem to be drinking quite a lot, Carmen observed mildly. They walked on toward the pedestrian precinct. Carmen used to think that a good time was getting drunk. Like that was her at the beginning of the book. Like how the turns have tabled. Oh my goodness. They walked on towards the pedestrian precinct where the old age pensioners sat out feeding the birds. After a while, Carmen said slowly, actually, it's not all the same to me which one you join. Ellen cast her a sidelong glance. Well, look, Mum, there's just one thing I ought to say. If you joined a support group that was hostile to our movement, I'd sort of have to draw the line. Ellen ground to a halt. And what does that mean, pray? She demanded, making her words very distinct. Oh, Holy One. Carmen made an effort to control her sense of unease. Her mother's tone was so hostile, so uncharacteristic, that she had a disorienting sense that Satan was speaking directly through the mouthpiece of her mother. It sounded like the sort of thing Satan would say. She regarded her mother severely and willed the evil spirits to be subdued. I hate when you're talking to a cult member and you can see them doing their prayers over you. It just makes me act like Satan even more. It just makes me play into the role. Yes, I am Satan. Start flicking your tongue like that guy from Harry Potter. He's like, you start playing it up. Oh my goodness. It means, well, she put her hands on her hips as though, frankly, it was obvious. I mean, I'm hardly likely to be able to see you if you join a hostile group. All the groups are hostile, Ellen pointed out. If the parents agreed with it, they wouldn't need to form a group. As it is, I should think they all band together and sit around chain smoking, discussing how strange their children's eyes are. Carmen didn't seem to be taking anything in, so Ellen gripped her arm and repeated it more loudly. All the groups are hostile, Carmen. Perhaps that might suggest something to you? Yes, said Carmen distantly. It suggests that there's a lot of persecution against our movement. But I wouldn't expect my own mother to join in persecuting me, not if she loved me. Carmen frowned, not if it meant we couldn't see each other anymore. She stared intently at her mother so that her meaning could not be mistaken. I really love you and I wouldn't want not to see you. Ellen felt something contract in her stomach region. She felt suddenly so weak that all her anger drained away, and still Carmen's distant eyes challenged her as though she just issued an all important ultimatum. Ellen ran it through in a bewildered fashion in her head. After all, what could she usefully threaten in return? She could say to Carmen, what point is there in my seeing you if you're a different person from the one I love? She could say, suit yourself, it's your life, throw it away if you want to, see if I care, and walk away with her nose in the air. But if she did so, Carmen would take her at her word. And the truth was, Ellen did care, whereas Carmen's ascendancy came from her manifest indifference. There seemed to be no section in Carmen's new brain marked compromise. Everything was an absolute. If Ellen called her bluff, the tie would be severed, and that tie was the only link with reality that Carmen had left. Wow, that's such a good way to put it. For her part, Carmen, although she continued to stare at her mother with icy composure, was not calm. Her heart was beating against her rib cage as though it wanted to get out, and she was praying very hard. What if she had to cut her mother off? Why could her mother not see the obvious? That unless she made some concession of positivity towards the family, then the severance was inevitable. The very thought of it gave Carmen an acute stabbing pain in her chest. It made her want to gasp. It had been hard enough to sever her ties with Lucy, but at least Lucy had shared an understanding of the wisdom that required it. Her mother understood so little. And what if this was the test they'd talked about? The kind of test that father had to set. Would she be able to bear it? But then hadn't father borne much more suffering, much more self-denial in his harrowing years in the North Korean prison camp and since? I have yet to see any hard evidence that Reverend Moon actually lived in a prison camp in North Korea. From all we know, he was imprisoned in South Korea for fucking too many people's wives. But they use this as like the bar. Like, you should be open to be a prisoner in a North Korean camp. And like, we talked about this as kids. We like at camp, we like impersonated True Father. We'd be little kids. We're like, look, Moon hanging by my thumbs in the prison camp of North Korea. And I'm getting beaten to a pulp and getting all my ribs broken with baseball bats by an interrogator. And then he's gonna waterboard me. Should we practice waterboarding? Look, I'll just lay back like that. Like, we literally practiced waterboarding on each other. Not even lying. Until staff members and concerned people said enough was enough. And reminded us that it's like against the Geneva Convention or whatever. Virginia practice waterboarding. I feel like your curiosity gets the better of you. Like, at that age, you're also the type of dipshit who might be tempted by the Tide Pod challenge. You know what I'm saying? Just to have something to do. But like, our version of the Tide Pod challenge was like practicing waterboarding each other. That was a fun story time. Yeah, exactly, Jennifer. There was a photograph of a man carrying another man on his back, and Reverend Moon said it was him, but it definitely was not. It was like from Time magazine. And I dead ass looked at that picture and thought it was him and like felt admiration for Reverend Moon. And like, we imitated carrying people for miles and miles and told ourselves this story that Reverend Moon had to carry his friend on his back for like miles. None of that ever fucking happened. None of it. So crazy. Ellen's gaze faltered. She had no threats or promises that could shake her daughter's terrifying equilibrium. Oh, she thinks, oh, because Carmen's stonewalling. I still do that. She decided in that moment that there was nothing left for her to do for Carmen but to be a touchstone of the reality that was the past, a reminder to Carmen of her own history. As she stood there, lost for words, she thought just for a fleeting second that she saw something vulnerable, something pathetic in Carmen's face, something that reminded her of the old Carmen. On impulse, she reached out to her and held her tightly, feeling a surge of hopeless tenderness as the silken head brushed under her cheek. They stood there, closely intertwined, like one lonely, deformed figure against the dreary expanse of pink and white paving stones. All around them, the ravaged pigeons preened and foraged in the council plant tubs, squabbling over the crisp packets and the clean-picked chicken bones. I love you both. I love you more than anything else. Do you understand that? Carmen nodded, but she could not relax into the embrace. Her mother continued talking softly and carefully into her hair. Whatever happens, whatever you might do, whatever hurtful things we might say to one another, that always stays the same. Wherever you are, you can always know that I'm there for you if you need me. You can know I love you and nothing will ever change that. She buried her nose in Carmen's parting. Tell me you've heard me. I've heard you, said Carmen, but she gave a heavy sigh. The truth was that she would never again need anything from her mother because her mother no longer had anything viable to give her. Her mother, with the most generous of hearts, could only offer debased, satanic love, a fallen love that wanted to control and dominate, a love that was frightening to let go of its possession. Once a person understood the true meaning of love, as Carmen did, then the kind of love her mother was describing sounded like the mean covetousness of property ownership. And what's crazy is like I'm reading this and I remember thinking and feeling that way. And I still low key feel that way when other people try to be nice to me. I'm just like, it's Satan. And I'm like, no, it's not Satan. Relax. It's not Satan. So like at any given time, I'm just like, it's Satan. No, no, not Satan. Not Satan. Friend. This is your friend. Anyone who tries to tell you that your friend is Satan is Satan. Okay, got it. I have to like remember every day. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Apparently, Carmen could sense something of her mother's desolation, so she didn't try to put these thoughts into words. She knew her mother wouldn't be able to understand them straight away. It gave Carmen some heart to know there was still a fingerhold. There was still some leverage if Carmen could just find the right way to handle her. She'd have to guide her gently. That's so crazy how she's like being hugged by her mom and still plotting to like bring her to a workshop. Ed Kaufman says, yes, Faith, there's no documented evidence for that prison stint in North Korea. Michael Breen, who wrote a book on Moon in 1997, tried to get documentation, but he was told to leave that topic alone. Dun, dun, dun. Tenderlung says, or he was the one being carried, most likely. That's how liars do. See, but he wasn't even in the picture. He didn't even matter that much. He wasn't even in the part of the world where that picture was taken. He just claimed an excellent photograph as his own. I feel so bad for Carmen right now. My body is starting to feel what she went through. Memories. Oh my gosh, we're almost done with this book. I'm getting so... Okay. Everything depended on Carmen because Carmen was the only one with any gift to give. It was up to her to use all her wiles, to channel all her love into making sure her mother would receive it. Just as they'd told her it would be, so it was. Her mother clung to her with a kind of desperation, almost like a child, thought Carmen remotely. And she herself was the parent figure, having to think for both of them, guiding her mother towards the Messiah, towards a destiny that, at first, her mother would resist. The blowing newspapers whipped dismally against their legs, and the few old people on the bench stared blankly at them, wondering if they were trying to keep warm or if one of them was going on a journey. Ellen hugged her daughter more urgently, hoping for a sign that her words had penetrated and had been understood. But Carmen's body was unresponsive, as if she was merely humoring her mother's need for physical intimacy and waiting for the mood to pass. Since it was hopeless, Ellen gave a world-weary sigh and let her go. As they dragged their feet past Marks and Spencer's, Ellen turned and said, "Do you need clothes? Is there anything you want?" Carmen thought quickly. In the past, she would immediately have said no, but the last few months of relentless frugality, the chiseling for heavenly funds, gave her a new greed. "You don't have much money, do you?" she asked. "I've got about 80 pounds or so spare. You can spend it if it means I can know you're warm and dry," said Ellen. It was, in fact, the last savings, and she'd been thinking of using it to take a weekend away, but she said nothing of that. There weren't many ways left for her to express her love. She had exhausted them all. "Thank you, that would be great," said Carmen, and no sooner had she spoken than she was swirling through the doors like a hurricane, trailing Ellen behind her. "What I really need is 5 skirts and an assortment of underclothes. Maybe some jumpers, if it'll run to that," said Carmen. She darted from rail to rail, ignoring the young section and heading straight for the middle-aged frumpy things. "Wouldn't you like something with a bit more style?" Ellen murmured uselessly as Carmen brushed past her, clutching her booty. It's funny because back then and in England, booty meant like a pirate's prize, and now when I read booty, I just think of like an ass. Clutching her booty, she's just hands on her knees, twerking on her thought shit. Like Ellen murmured uselessly as Carmen brushed past her, clutching her booty, eyes gleaming with purpose as she hurtled off towards the stirruped slacks. "Really, it doesn't matter," Carmen breezed as Ellen chased her down the aisle. "God likes us to look nice and tidy, that's all." Throw polythene packets of old ladies' Winsonette briefs into her basket, moving with a speed that defied Ellen to keep pace. Ellen gave up and just rested wearily against the pillar in the center of the store, watching without much interest as her Belgian midwinter break converted itself into bottle green tweed skirts, a powder blue crimpling dirndl, a twee Princess Diana blouse with cake frill neck, 4 pairs of ankle socks, and some senior citizens' carpet slippers. She just summoned up the energy to rendezvous with her at the cash deck when Carmen whooped, "Oh dear, I could do with some towels and flannels." "I should have thought the organization ought to provide those," Ellen objected. "After all, you get dirty on their time." Carmen shook her head with a cheery smile. "It'd be nice if they could, wouldn't it? But we have so many calls on our money. I mean, when you think about it, it's a registered charity, not a 3-star hotel." And then she whisked off adroitly through the shoppers, leaving Ellen to oversee the totting up nervously. Only halfway through the pile, they reached 55 pounds 90, and Ellen looked distractedly around to point the fact out to Carmen. It was just as the packing assistant was removing the labels that Ellen noticed all the sizes on the clothes were different. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Carmen was tripping towards her with a little stack of hand towels. "Carmen, what are you thinking about? All these things are different sizes." "That's how we are in the family," said Carmen brightly. "God's children come in all different shapes and sizes. Don't ask me why. I suppose that's how he likes us." It was then, as it dawned on Ellen that she was buying for a whole pack of anonymous Moonies, that something inside her just went snap. She felt the blood rushing to her ears and she shouted much louder than she meant to. "I'm not knitting out the whole crazy outfit. Get Reverend Moon to pay for them. He's the bloody multimillionaire, not me." The assistants stood stock still, their eyes widening with interest, electrified at a hint of passion in a place where a new influx of flannel blazers was the only drama. Even as she shouted it, she knew she had transgressed the unspoken boundary. She knew she'd made a mistake that she'd regret. "I'm sorry you feel that way," said Carmen evenly. In that moment, Ellen saw the blinds go down on Carmen's eyes with a curiously visible finality. In a daze, she wrote the check. Her daughter hovered some way away, suddenly indifferent. She stood on the pavement in the gathering room of falling dusk and watched Carmen scurrying across the road into the tube station, laden with carrier bags. She watched the little figure of her daughter buy a ticket. Carmen even turned to give a cheery wave. Ellen raised her hand, although she didn't really feel like waving. As Carmen disappeared beyond the barrier, Ellen continued to stand there in the cold, looking at the empty ticket hall. And when she gave up the idea that Carmen might suddenly, for whatever reason, reappear there, she knew she would never see her again. The book, you guys. It's the end of an era. You know, to be honest, I appreciate that ending. I appreciate the fuck out of that ending because that's facts. Like, I'm so sick and tired of how outsiders who've been raised on Disney think that everything's fucking hunky-dory and all you have to do is tell your friend that they've been brainwashed and they're like, "Oh, thanks so much for informing me. I just like that. I'm normal again. Here I am integrating into society without a second's like reflection or hesitation. Thank you so much." That's not how the shit works. Like, and the majority of Moonies who were recruited, it seems like, never snapped out of it. My parents included, my friends' parents included. Like, it is literally impossible. It is delusional to think that you can leave and indoctrinate and just carry on with your life afterward like nothing happened. Like, after your own like physiology has been hijacked by another person that way, and you realize that there are people who can fake friendship, fake romantic love, lie like it's nothing, lie like God is congratulating them and rewarding them for lying, right? Pressuring you with sleep deprivation and like convincing you to take less than your worth and spinning this whole story about how you're in a spiritual battle and like the laws of regular human interactions don't apply, like saying pledge every day to a nation that is outside of the realm of regular nations laws. Like, you can't just go back to your secular life knowing that there are people out there who break the rules that hard, who enslave people that easily. And it's like, you either confront how terrible that feels, knowing that there are people who are that sociopathic and have been convinced to think that they're doing God's will, or you just busy yourself as much as you were busy in the cult with like random outside things and you just become a workaholic. Like, ugly as fuck. Yes, I do know the concrete jungle. Thank you very much. My the way that I left the church was by joining a face-to-face sales company that had me doing face-to-face sales in like the Lower East Side projects and like hanging out with people who had emigrated from Jamaica to like convince people in the Bronx to like sponsor kids from also Jamaica, like Trinidad and Tobago, basically. It was not a learning curve. It was a learning brick wall. It was a learning 90-degree angle. That was a harsh reality. But they had to keep me around and they had to keep educating me on the outside world because they needed a body count. They needed to the sales company, like, you only got promoted if you had a certain on your team. So they were more than willing than most people to like put up with my cultiness because they just needed me on their sales team. So I learned a lot about life. I was told my experience wasn't that bad and that other normal religions are the same. Yeah, for a lot of people, it's easier to minimize what they've been through, myself included. Like, I'm even realizing on the video that I have on this channel, that was like my first video, I tried to act like the Unification Church is extinct, and it's not. It's very much not. But that was just something I told myself to feel better because it's definitely not what it was, but it's not extinct. It's still active. It does exist still. Um, During Reverend Moon's tax trial, we were fundraising for 20 hours a day. Even when they say they leave, if they don't challenge and dissect whatever they were taught, they're still under the Mooney spell. Exactly. And it's like, in order to admit how much help you need and how much like how many old belief systems you need to challenge in order to truly start thinking for yourself, it's really uncomfortable because then you have to admit how bad it really was. And it becomes like horrifying to see how strongly you used to insist this was normal. And it becomes horrifying to hear your friends that you think you're still tight with talk about how it wasn't that bad and talk about how it's like not awful. You know, it's almost like by trying to make yourself feel better, the people around you that saying things that you used to think were normal, it becomes worse and worse and worse. Like things definitely get worse before they get better. Tender lungs. I'm 41 and never left the projects. I love it though, never want to leave. And sales do teach you about life and different types of people. Yeah, I learned from sales that like you really stereotypes don't mean shit. Like they really don't. Like some of my best sales days were in the projects that where apparently people have no money. But it's like people in the projects are more willing to give what they do have to try to help people in whatever way they can. But then on the flip side, it's like I'd have people in more affluent areas who'd be able to sign up for an entire year's worth of monthly sponsorship all in one swipe. And like obviously that is the ideal donor. So it's like people are just people, man. Sales and fundraising equals an emotional rock tumbler. That is such a good way to put it, man. I would not be the person that I am if I hadn't done sales immediately after doing fundraising. And I only did sales for so long because I was like, you can get paid to do this. I was doing this for free. I was paying other people to be allowed to live on a compound and fundraise for Reverend Moon. I used to have to pay money to be allowed to fundraise. And then I got paid to fundraise. I was like, I don't care if other people say this is a shitty job. I can get paid to do what I've been doing for free since I was in the single digits. Tender lungs. Some of us got money. Don't tell nobody. Exactly. People in the projects be having money and don't be telling anybody. People, I ran into Dougie Fresh in Harlem, man. I accidentally found his brownstone and everyone was so angry. They're like, of course, this little white bitch, fresh from a bunker, who has no idea what rap is. Of course, she's the idiot who runs into Dougie Fresh and like can't sign him up because he doesn't want to give out his credit card information, let alone his address. Like, did you even get a selfie with him? No, you didn't. Like, I made everyone so mad. That's the way to do it, honestly. Why buy a mansion when you can just reinvest in the hood? You can just buy a brownstone, reinvest in property. Celebrities on Instagram be stupid as fuck. You sold Michael Jackson foil prints? Yo, we had unicorns and bowls of fruit and kittens and dumb shit like that. A Michael Jackson. Oh, we had some really cool like Native American themed ones though. Those did really well in California at the border of Mexico. Tender lungs. I did telemarketing doing cigarette surveys and liked it because plus it wasn't selling anything, so that was nice. Emmy says, I had a friend say back in the day that if they were on Fear Factor, they would jump out of a plane, eat a spider, but if they were asked to fundraise, they would walk away from the money. Yeah, it depends how many hours they want me to fundraise on Fear Factor. Ed Kaufman says, the Moonies are not dead for sure. They call it the blessing movement now. Ideal marriages, not even close. Man. Well, hour and a half, dog. That's it. That concludes the series. We did it. Some review of Heavenly Deception. Brooks writes with tremendous warmth, a natural knack for dialogue, and such persuasive narrative skill that traveling further into the cult's clutches, your brain feels insidiously sapped. It begs to be read. From the New Statesman. The sinister mind-bending practiced by the Moonies is a serious subject, and Miss Brooks writes about it with a compelling crusading energy that makes for a convincing, disturbing, and valuable novel. The Daily Telegraph. The author's wit and penetrating observation succeed in creating an unnervingly dark study of religious mania. Western Morning News. A powerful study in psychic manipulation and a well-aimed and hard-hitting story. London Review of Books. I'm glad I started with this one. I'll have to come up with a new way to interact with everybody. All right, say your goodbyes, say your farewells, come back and leave a permanent comment that's not in the live stream. It's been Riggy Real. I shall be brainstorming new content for myself. Take it easy. Stay safe out there.